The old world has ended, leaving desolation in its wake. Beyond the rubble and ash, only echoes of humanity remain, tenuous threads of hope strangled by a relentless darkness. In these three tales of post-apocalyptic horror, witness how survivors cling to life and question what it truly means to be alive. Long after the final bombs fell, the once thriving city of Silverport lay in ruin. Towers of steel and glass had collapsed into heaps of twisted metal, their shattered windows reflecting a sky dimmed by perpetual haze. In the sprawl of devastation, small pockets of humanity struggled to endure. Most had abandoned hope of restoring the old civilization, instead learning to exist with what little remained. Elias Cortland was among those who refused to abandon the ghost of the city. He walked its broken streets daily, meticulously noting which structures looked stable and which threatened to collapse at the next stiff breeze. Though roads were cracked and choked with debris, he navigated them with a determined stride. Each evening he returned to a makeshift shelter in the remains of a high school gymnasium, where a dozen or so survivors congregated for mutual protection. The gym's roof had caved in partially, allowing a sliver of light to illuminate the basketball court. In that place, they huddled around meager fires, discussing rumors of faint radio signals from beyond the ash-choked horizon. Though some claimed to hear voices on scavenged headsets, Elias had yet to discover solid evidence of any organized community elsewhere. Most signals were static or faint transmissions on loop, presumably relics from a time before the city died. Still, every new day in Silverport brought a subtle shift in the atmosphere, an indescribable tension lingering like a half-formed whisper. Some survivors blamed leftover radiation or toxic dust storms for the unsettling sense of being watched, but others swore they felt eyes in the gloom, observing from a distance. One evening, Elias returned from a solitary expedition with trembling hands. He spoke of stumbling onto a hidden passage beneath the old library. A secret door had been revealed when a collapsed wall shifted after a minor earthquake. Something about the space beneath the floor had chilled him in a way no charred skeleton or empty cupboard ever had. Yet he refused to describe precisely what he had seen. Instead, he took a small group of volunteers and ventured out the next morning to investigate. The library stood in the city's central district, miraculously upright despite its scorched facade and broken windows. The building loomed against the smog-shrouded sun, like a wounded beast waiting to die. Inside, most books had been destroyed by mold and dampness, shelves collapsed in disarray. Following Elias's directions, the group carefully navigated the wreckage until they reached an isolated corner where a decorative metal grate had broken free. Behind it, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness. At first, they saw only rubble and more ruin. Then, deeper in, a corridor emerged, its walls lined with what appeared to be old posters. The images on those posters had faded, but their words remained intact. Each one proclaimed phrases like, "Witness the flickers," and "Prepare for the ascension," accompanied by crude sketched symbols that resembled stylized eyes. Though the posters seemed decades old, none had the layer of dust or grime one would expect in a forgotten tunnel. The group pressed on, uneasy. The corridor ended in a circular chamber with a makeshift altar at its center. A circle of black candles stood around the altar, each candle melted down to a stub as if used many times. The floor bore a strange pattern etched into the concrete, a web of interconnected lines leading to a single symbol. An uneasy hush fell over Elias and his companions. They noticed the walls were covered in graffiti resembling eyes, all crudely drawn yet disturbingly similar. Someone had been here, perhaps long after the bombs, continuing a ritual no one could fully comprehend. As the group searched for clues, one of them discovered a leather-bound journal resting on a nearby ledge. Its pages detailed a group of followers calling themselves the Flickers. They believed the world's destruction had been ordained, that the end of civilization was merely the first step toward a new plane of existence. The text referenced secret gatherings, potent incantations, and the promise that once the world had fallen silent, the Flickers would guide humanity's chosen few into a realm beyond pain or mortality. The journal's final entries mentioned sacrificial ceremonies. The script took on an increasingly frantic tone, describing apparitions that would appear in the darkness, slender forms lacking faces yet brimming with a malevolent hunger. These entities, the journal claimed, were attracted to hopelessness, feeding on those who had lost faith. Though the text was incomplete, it hinted that the flickers had either vanished into the depths of the city or been consumed by the very forces they courted. Disturbed by these revelations, the group returned to the gymnasium. Elias forbade anyone from returning to the hidden chamber, believing it might harbor a dangerous presence or lethal traps. But by then it was too late. Word spread among the survivors, igniting fear and fascination in equal measure. Some dismissed it as a hoax from a desperate cult. Others took the threat seriously, posting night guards and urging the group to avoid traveling alone. In the days that followed, a series of unsettling events plagued the survivors. At first, they experienced minor but unnerving phenomena: flickering shadows at the periphery of vision, hushed voices with no source. More troubling were the nights when certain watchers claimed to see silhouettes drifting through the city streets, vanishing around corners only to reappear a block away. Each time someone investigated, they found nothing but cold air and the faint odor of decay. Anxiety spread through the community. A rift formed among those who believed in the presence of these so-called flickers and those who insisted it was fear playing tricks on the mind. Elias, typically calm under pressure, seemed shaken. He arranged a meeting in the gym, hoping to dispel rumors by addressing them directly. But while he spoke of unity and caution, his own eyes betrayed his terror. That night, a minor tremor rattled the gym. Dust rained from the sagging roof. Survivors scrambled to secure their supplies. When the trembling subsided, someone noticed that one of their own, a quiet woman named Ruth, was missing. Search parties scoured the gym and surrounding streets, calling her name to no avail. At dawn, they found a single black candle stub at the library entrance, reminiscent of those in the hidden chamber's altar. Desperate, the survivors ventured back to the underground corridor. The altar area looked unchanged, except for a fresh chalked symbol on the floor, drawn over the old design. It resembled a stylized human figure with arms raised, surrounded by multiple eye-like shapes. Near the altar lay Ruth's shoes. No trace of the woman herself remained. Terrified, the searchers fled the chamber, convinced that whatever the flickers had awakened now threatened them all. In the aftermath, the group decided to abandon Silverport. Though resources were scarce outside the city, they believed it safer to scatter than remain in a place haunted by ancient rites. One by one, families packed what they could and slipped away into the gray horizon. Some formed small caravans, seeking rumored enclaves of survivors in distant regions. Elias remained behind with a few loyal companions, determined to face the flickers, if only to prevent any further spread of their influence. His final journal entry hinted at a silent confrontation. He spoke of standing in the library corridor, calling out to the lurking presence, demanding answers. The words ended abruptly, as though he'd been seized mid-sentence. No one heard from him again. Those who fled Silverport told stories around campfires of a city claimed by ghosts and cultic forces. Over time, few dared to return. The once proud skyline remained a crumpled tomb, its silent streets roamed by shadows, the final testament to a world where even the apocalypse was not the end, but the beginning of a new and more sinister unknown. Years after a meteor storm ravaged the planet, the sky burned with an unearthly red glow during sunrise and sunset. The atmosphere, cluttered with cosmic dust, cast the ground in a murky crimson hue. Surviving enclaves dotted the landscape, each sealed behind makeshift barriers to keep out roving bands of marauders and mutated wildlife. People rarely traveled between these enclaves, for the journey across the wastelands meant braving poisonous winds and scorching daylight. The Red Cliff Enclave stood at the base of a massive plateau whose surface was pockmarked by meteor impacts. Its walls, constructed from scrap metal and reinforced concrete, loomed as a desperate fortress against the desolation beyond. Inside, families tried to reconstruct a semblance of normal life. They tended to thin gardens, rationed water filtered from deep underground, and hoped their children might survive into an era less defined by fear. Yet beneath the daylight's crimson glare, a hush settled over Red Cliff. People moved quickly, shadows stretching ominously, as though the land itself sought to consume their souls. A young orphan named Sorrel lived in a cramped corner of the enclave. Her parents had perished in the meteor storm, leaving her with only scattered memories of a world that once housed vast forests and blue skies. Unlike most other children, she harbored a fierce curiosity about the plateau's summit. Rumor claimed a small group of survivors lived up there. Strange figures who thrived in the toxic environment, worshipping the burning sky as a divine omen. No one from Redcliffe had ever confirmed these rumors. Each time a scouting party tried to ascend the plateau, they never returned. One afternoon, as the scorching sun bleached the horizon with red light, Sorrel sneaked away from her duties. She slipped through a damaged portion of the wall, ignoring the watchman's pleas to stay inside. Though fear prickled along her spine, something stronger, an inexplicable pull, guided her to the base of the plateau. The rocky slope was steep, scattered with loose gravel that threatened to give way beneath her feet. Yet she climbed, each step fueled by a desire to uncover the truth behind the stories. Halfway up, she found the remains of an old shelter. Pieces of tattered cloth fluttered in the wind, and a rusted canteen lay abandoned on a ledge. As she caught her breath, a distant chant echoed from above, carried on the toxic breeze. The voices were dissonant, almost inhuman. Sorrel pressed on, curiosity overshadowing her anxiety. The air thinned as she neared the summit, and an acrid smell burned in her nose. Upon reaching the top, she glimpsed a sprawling crater. The terrain looked even harsher than below, scattered with jagged rock formations. In the center of this crater stood a ring of tall, makeshift totems carved from meteor shards. They glimmered in the red sunlight, each etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly like embers. A group of people circled the totems, their ragged attire dyed deep crimson. Their faces bore patterns of scars, as though self-inflicted or part of a ritual. One figure, taller than the rest, raised a carved staff, chanting an eerie litany in a language Sorrel did not recognize. Before she could hide, one of them spotted her. A startled hush fell over the group, and the tall figure beckoned her forward. Sorrel, trembling, approached slowly. The figure introduced herself as Zelena, referring to their gathering as the Children of the Crimson Skyline. She claimed they had long awaited an outsider's arrival, someone unafraid of the red glow and chosen by the spirits that dwelled within the meteors. Sorrel, unsure whether to flee or remain, found herself mesmerized by Zelena's calm intensity and the mesmerizing patterns swirling around the meteor totems. That night, the Children of the Crimson Skyline welcomed Sorrel into their circle. They shared morsels of peculiar fungi said to have grown in the meteorite's aftermath. Each bite sent a wave of warmth through her, staving off hunger. In hushed conversations around a small fire, they revealed their beliefs. The meteors were not a curse, but a gift, heralding a new stage of human evolution. They insisted that the red sky was a sign that the old ways had died, and only those attuned to the meteoric energy would survive the new era. Over several days, Sorrel observed their rituals. At dawn, they faced the blazing red sun in silent reverence, arms raised as if absorbing its power. By dusk, they sang haunting melodies that echoed across the plateau, calling on the Crimson Mother to transform their bodies into something stronger, resistant to the toxins that plagued the wasteland. Sorrel began to feel strange sensations, subtle tingles along her skin, a heightened awareness of the slightest temperature change, an uncanny ability to sense when the sun would rise or set. Yet beneath these wonders lurked darker hints. She overheard cryptic remarks about an ultimate sacrifice, an offering meant to cement their bond with the Crimson Mother. One evening, as Zelena led a particularly fervent rite, Sorrel noticed a newly carved meteor shard set upon a makeshift altar. Its surface gleamed with fresh blood. Her heart lurched, the realization dawning that the Children of the Crimson Skyline might seal their beliefs in gruesome fashion. Doubt gnawed at her. She recalled the safer, if harsher life she'd left behind in Redcliffe. While the enclave was stifling and bleak, no one spoke of blood sacrifices or cosmic deities. Unsure whether to trust the bizarre cult, she confronted Zelena, demanding an explanation. Zelena smiled with a distant compassion, explaining that the offering was a necessary step for true metamorphosis. She insisted that the meteor's cosmic energy demanded a tribute, that once the ritual was complete, the children would transcend humanity's limitations. Fearing what that entailed, Sorrel resolved to escape. Late one night, under the cover of the crimson moon, she attempted to slip away. The plateau's frigid wind bit at her face as she carefully descended. However, at the last moment, a robed cultist grabbed her arm. He pleaded with her not to forsake her destiny. His grip was relentless, his eyes hollow. Summoning her courage, Sorrel wrenched free, nearly tumbling down a steep embankment. She fled, leaving behind the crater and its eerie totems, tears stinging her cheeks. By the time she reached Redcliffe's walls, exhaustion claimed her. Guards rushed to admit her, relieved yet angry at her risk-taking. Sorrel breathlessly recounted what she had seen. Disturbed by her tale, the Enclave leaders debated how to respond. Some argued they should band together to confront the cult, while others insisted they ignore it, hoping the group would remain isolated on the plateau. In the following weeks, Sorrel noticed changes in herself. Her senses felt sharper, and she often woke from dreams filled with glowing red symbols, reminiscent of the meteor totems. She spoke less, haunted by the possibility that part of her spirit remained tethered to the plateau. When the Enclave's watchmen reported chanting sounds coming from the heights, Sorrel felt a pang in her chest, as if the children of the crimson skyline were calling her name in the wind. Seasons passed, and Redcliffe endured. The cult on the plateau remained out of sight, though their presence weighed on the community's morale. Sometimes survivors spotted robed figures traversing the ridges at dawn, arms raised to the flaming sky. Sorrel, now older, understood that the boundary between the cult's devotion and the Enclave's survival was tenuous. In quiet moments, she contemplated returning to the crater, either to broker peace or to embrace the metamorphosis she had fled. Although she never did return, the memory of those meteor totems lingered. She carried with her the knowledge that beyond Redcliffe's walls lay a belief system older and stranger than anything the old world had known. A devotion that might one day reshape human existence. And as each sunrise bathed the land in crimson light, Sorrel wondered whether her own destiny had been left behind. High atop the plateau, singing to a sky that still burned with cosmic promise. The city once called Emberfall was now barely more than smoldering ruins and fractured highways. An experimental energy plant had exploded decades ago, incinerating large portions of the metropolis. Crumbling structures and molten metal formed bizarre sculptures that lined the abandoned roads, giving the place an otherworldly appearance of charred silhouettes frozen in time. Toxic vapors pooled in the lower districts, and the few who survived lived in elevated enclaves that overlooked the ashen remains. Raven Kessler was among those who believed Emberfall held secrets worth uncovering. An itinerant scribe, she traveled from settlement to settlement, documenting oral histories and searching for hints of technology that might restore some measure of civilization. Whispers of the bizarre phenomena in Emberfall had drawn her there. Stories of disembodied voices echoing through the streets at dawn, and the occasional flicker of ghostly figures glimpsed in twisted alleyways. After weeks of navigating labyrinthine rubble, Raven reached a tall tower near the city's edge. Though half of it had collapsed, the upper floors remained mostly intact. From that vantage, she surveyed Emberfall's lifeless panorama. Entire blocks fused together by molten slag, roofs caved in from the explosion's shockwave, and a constant haze tinted amber by the still simmering energy that permeated the air. During her first night atop the tower, she heard faint voices reverberate through the deserted avenues. The sound resembled a crowd in distant conversation, yet no one walked those streets. With each passing hour, the voices grew clearer as though approaching. Raven felt an urge to follow them, but caution prevailed. She waited until morning before venturing into the wreckage below, guided by a strange compulsion to discover the source of the phantom chatter. Navigating the city's interior proved treacherous. Streets were blocked by collapsed bridges, irradiated puddles glowed with an unnatural luminescence, and the crumbled remnants of towering buildings threatened to topple at any moment. Yet Raven pressed on, noticing that certain roads bore symbols etched in the concrete, loops and whorls reminiscent of circuit boards. These patterns led her deeper into Emberfall's heart, culminating at a massive crater lined with twisted girders and partially melted wires. At its center stood an enormous machine, half submerged in blackened earth. Raven deduced this was part of the experimental energy plant that had triggered the city's destruction. She marveled at its shape, cylindrical modules connected by thick cables, forming a ring of technology with no clear purpose. The ambient heat from it was still intense, forcing her to keep a distance. Searching the perimeter, she found fragments of what appeared to be data tablets and half-scorched notebooks. Many were illegible, but a few words stood out: neural integration, citywide conduit, and collective consciousness. A cold realization gripped her. She recalled rumors that Emberfall's plant had been more than a power station. It had been an experiment in linking human minds to a centralized grid, an attempt at forging a utopia free from conflict and scarcity. Evidently, the catastrophic explosion had trapped that emerging consciousness within the city, leaving behind an echo of thousands of minds fused by violent energy. The voices she heard might be the residual calls of those who perished, seeking release. Over the following days, Raven cataloged her findings in a tattered journal. Each night, the city's echoes intensified. She would hear snatches of conversation, laughter, or cries, as though entire neighborhoods persisted in an endless loop of half-lived moments. At times, she glimpsed outlines of people across the street, flickering like holograms. When she approached, they vanished, leaving only heat shimmer and swirling ash. Driven by a mixture of empathy and fascination, Raven devised a plan to interface with the half-buried machine. She believed the collective consciousness might be reasoned with, or at least set free. In a small, damaged control room near the crater's edge, she found a console that still flickered with intermittent power. After scavenging salvageable circuit boards and rewiring them, she managed to coax the console into a rudimentary startup sequence. The console's ancient screen glowed, revealing cryptic code that scrolled by too fast to comprehend. Eventually, lines of text stabilized, forming disjointed sentences. We remain, trapped in the cycle, release, resist anomalies. Raven's heart pounded as she tapped on the keyboard, introducing herself. The screen responded with more fragmented words. You can help. The city hungers, freed or devoured, connection needed. Cautious but determined, she noticed a series of cables that appeared designed for neural input. A helmet-like device hung from a bracket, wires leading back into the console. The risk was enormous, but the promise of unveiling the city's secret and potentially granting peace to the countless souls trapped in the echo compelled her to continue. Carefully, she placed the helmet on her head, bracing against waves of static electricity. In an instant, her vision exploded with images. She saw Emberfall as it once was: bustling streets, neon-lit plazas, families strolling beneath skyscrapers. She sensed a boundless web of consciousness, thousands of voices speaking in harmony, all anchored to the experimental network. Then came the cataclysmic explosion, a surge of unstoppable power, severing bodies from their minds. Fear and agony reverberated through the system, leaving it twisted but alive. As Raven's consciousness threaded through this digital psychic realm, flickers of other presences noticed her. Some clamored for help, while others viewed her as an intruder. She felt them tugging at her memories, glimpsing her own doubts and hopes. In a voice that seemed to echo across an endless corridor, she pleaded for them to let go, to move on from the city's broken remains. She sensed a momentary unity, a great wave of longing from the trapped souls. Then a searing pain assaulted her mind, as if the network fought to preserve itself by assimilating her. With every ounce of will, she fought back, urging the system to release the ghosts it held captive. In the end, she felt the network buckle under the strain of its own contradiction. It needed living minds to persist, yet those minds craved escape. A bright flash of light filled her consciousness, followed by absolute darkness. When Raven awoke, the helmet was scorched and the console's screen lay cracked. A hush enveloped Emberfall, as though the city itself inhaled and held its breath. She realized the once constant echoes had ceased. No more disembodied chatter drifted through the streets, no flickers of half-formed apparitions. The circuit-like symbols etched in the roads had dimmed, as if the residual energy powering them had finally dispersed. Gathering her notes, Raven made her way out of Emberfall. Though the city's monstrous spires and fused highways still loomed, the oppressive sense of being watched had lifted. In time, she shared her experiences with other settlements, recounting how an entire metropolis's population was suspended between life and death, until one final connection allowed them to find release. Some listeners dismissed her as a storyteller spinning tall tales. Others believed every word, taking comfort in the thought that the countless souls of Emberfall might at last have found rest. Raven herself never doubted what she had witnessed. She would forever remember the surge of voices fading into peace, leaving behind a silent ruin that, despite its blackened shell, felt strangely cleansed. No one else ventured into Emberfall for years, spooked by the rumors of haunting illusions. Eventually, the city stood as a testament to humankind's ambition and the grim cost of meddling with forces beyond full comprehension. Yet in that silent realm of twisted metal and charred roads, a final whisper of hope lingered. Sometimes, even in a world ravaged by apocalypse, a single determined spirit could unshackle the chain that bound thousands to an unquiet fate. The embers of civilization may be few, but each story shows that horror thrives where hope teeters on the edge. Thank you for stepping into these post-apocalyptic realms. Remember, survival can be as haunting as any nightmare, especially when the darkest secrets come from what we once called home.